It's not unusual for current articles written by advocates of listening and spoken language or American Sign Language to include concerns about sign systems. Let's talk about some of those, especially with regard to signing exact English. Sign use hinders speech. This is a hot topic in our field. However, there's empirical evidence that suggests that sign can support the development of speech, both the understanding of speech and the production of speech. For examples, see our webinar on the speech, listening, and English language strategies used at Northwest School for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children. Gleisen and her colleagues studied children who used sign and had cochlear implants. They found that for the children they studied, sign did not interfere with the spoken word processing, and many children benefited when they were perceiving sound.
Let me prove these qualities. I was already nominated 3 times for service above some. I am on a swim team. I am helping my swim team to run swim meets. While playing sports, I've learned to advocate for myself.
Perhaps you've heard about some of the studies conducted by Gears and her team, at least 2 published in the last several years, in which it is purported that sign hinders speech development. The methods section of these publications should be read carefully. The data for which the original study was based was conducted in 2008. It has been used in more recently published articles, but it's still the same data set. In this research, whether families signed or not was studied using parent survey and never filmed or analyzed. I discussed this information in an earlier segment of these webinars. The information is only about families who use some form of simultaneous communication prior to CI implementation and up to 3 years afterwards. Sign language is defined as including all methods of simultaneous communication, ASL, and even baby signs. These widely diverse methods of communication were analyzed as one group. The researchers found that children whose parents used some degree of signing had better speech perception, listening, and speech articulation than those children whose parents reported that they used some form of sign communication. Some of these parents used sign until their child was 12 months post-implant, and others for 24 or 36 months. Sign might have been used for half the day or more than half the day. Those were the 2 choices. The study did not follow the children after 36 months. Thus, the results differ from research that involves signing in preschool, elementary, and middle school, such as we have conducted at Northwest School, as well as for those parents and teachers who are using a consistent, identifiable method of signing, such as C. The research differs from the actual taking of language samples analyzed to the degree of accuracy in signing between adults or children. Peggy Mayer noted that children developing English language learn best when production speech is taught in small steps, encouraged, and reinforced, and when correct English grammar is expected and corrected. Let's watch some students developing more articulate speech when it's paired with signing exact English.
Nose, close your eyes. Spread.
Spread.
Yep. Open your eyes. Did everyone get it? Spread. You know what that means.
Yeah.
Spread. So this plant spread in the southern United States. Is it from there? No. Where is this plant from?
Japan.
Japan.
And they are here.
All right. This farmer plants kudzu on his farm. He didn't know how fast the weed grows in warm, humid places.
Oh,
no.
But that's the year.
Right?
40, 50, 60. Oh my God.
Those are the
70.
days. Do you think it is easy or hard to get rid of this plant? Hard. Yeah. Was it a good idea or a bad idea to move it from Japan? It was a bad idea.
Yeah. Oh no, down.
Which word is the vocabulary word? Spread. One more time. I'm not hearing the D on that.
Spread.
Good D at the end. Yep, spread. So just like plants, fungi can spread. What's that?
Mold.
Not
Mold. This is one of your new vocabulary words
Not
too.
yet.
Signing Exact English, C, is used so that the children understand the expectations. Another concern about Signing Exact English is that it's not a language. C is not a language. It is a code for English. I can tell you, as the mother of 2 children raised on Signing Exact English and as a deaf educator, that anything can be communicated in C that can be communicated in any other language, or a written form of English for that matter. That is to say that C is not perfect, writing is not perfect, but they do a pretty good job of it. Any concept can be conveyed in C, no matter how abstract. That is to say that C can be used to convey cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP, that was discussed earlier in this series. Our researcher, Mitchell, wrote about a decade ago that there's no logical, implicit reason why contrived systems of communication such as C should be considered less functional than natural languages. Remember, you're welcome to contact me about any of the research that I'm citing here, or to go to the Northwest School for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children website and download the several research articles that we've published over the last 6 to 8 years that are available for you there. In my experience of working with parents over the last 40 years, C-using parents are not troubled by the fact that C is not an actual natural language. They're much more interested in having a communication method that works for their child and that will help their child to learn articulate speech and the language needed to read and comprehend what is read. These children, studies have shown, are successful in high school, go to college, earn a college degree, and are employed at higher rates than the national averages. A third concern is that C cannot be used in a manner that represents grammatically correct English. This is simply false. At one time, there was a popular research study written up by Marmol and Petito that made this claim. That study used 2 adults who worked at a school for the deaf and purported to use Pidgin Signed English. Pidgin Signed English, as you might remember, does not claim to represent the grammar of English. It's a system that combines both American Sign Language and English signing, so no one would expect that the grammar of English would be completely represented. Still, that study by Marmor and Petito is still used even though it was conducted in the 80s. Today, it's rare that those who have read the available research on this topic do not acknowledge that C can convey English on the hands. So, before I review that literature, let's look again at how C is designed to represent English for deaf students. I'll give you a minute to read through this slide, which conveys how see as a model to represent grammatically correct English. How, you might wonder, I wonder as a parent and an educator, how people think that deaf students are to learn English when they don't have access to it. By signing grammatically complete English on our hands, we provide that visual access. Several years ago, I asked different groups of adults to sign sentences that I had contrived. 2 years later, I asked those same adults to transcribe themselves signing the sentences. The signed English users and the pidgin signed English users had a difficult time not only retrieving the grammar, but also capturing the meaning of the original sentences. The signing exact English users had no trouble. They were able to retrieve sentences like "the cars in the lot are lined up in rows," "time is fleeting," and the other 23 sentences that they were asked to transcribe. I wonder, as a parent and a deaf educator, how deaf children are to understand and use grammatically complete English when they don't have access to it. There's no research to suggest that we should sign incomplete grammar, such as "you go bathroom you," to deaf children. That's actually a sentence I remember from when I was a student teacher. We need to sign grammatically accurate English so that our children can learn it. Peggy Mayer suggested that when people say that they're using sign-supported speech, kind of a newer term for pidgin signed English, that they're signing the nouns and verbs. Those are actually the parts of a sentence that a child usually can catch. It's the little parts of the words. It's the pronouns, the conjunctions, the prefixes and suffixes that are hard to hear. Research shows this, and that children often miss. Those are what we should be signing if we're going to sign sign-supported speech. Mayer provided spontaneous language samples that illustrate the kind of signing in English that's possible when adults are motivated to sign accurate grammar and vocabulary. Teachers who were filmed didn't know that their sign-to-voice ratio was going to be calculated. They thought they were being filmed to capture the speech and listening and English language strategies that we use at our school. You've seen some of these clips. A teacher with a kindergartner talking about coconuts. In that sample, the teacher of the deaf signed 93% of what she was saying. She omitted words like "oh" and the vocabulary that was used when she was using a speech screen and wanted the child to listen. I just mentioned sign-to-voice ratio, so let me discuss that term. Sign-to-voice ratio is calculated by determining the number of word parts, or bound morphemes, that are signed compared to the number that are said. I developed sign-to-voice ratio when I was conducting a whole series of studies involving parents and professionals working with deaf children. They were filmed and coded. The results showed that users of Signing Exact English signed more completely, more grammatically correctly than did users of Signed English or Pidgin Signed English. I usually suggest that parents and professionals attempt to sign 100% of what they're saying. Take a language sample, a clip, calculate the sign-to-voice ratio, and set goals for improvement. Lee, a researcher in Australia, did similar work to Mayer. He suggested that positive steps can be taken to sign consistent and accurate English. First of all, adequate training and experience using the system. understanding the concepts behind it, the rationale and the principles and the specific rules, having a positive attitude in using the system, being committed to the use of it at all times, and being monitored and coached. At our school, our administrators sit in on classes and monitor the Signing Exact English use of our teachers and our assistant teachers. They set goals in collaboration with those professionals, and improvement occurs. Another concern about Signing Exact English is that children who use it will not be able to communicate with deaf adults. You may remember that Signing Exact English was invented in 1972. That's some 40 years ago, and those first users are adults today. They exhibit a wide array of communication abilities, from American Sign Language to spoken English and everything in between. Children who grew up on C often learn to code switch between different people who use different modalities and methods of communication. As one example, we have 2 students who are currently enrolled at our school. They use ASL at home and Signing Exact English here at school. They're perfectly able to code switch between those 2 languages, even though they're 3 and 4 years old. In addition, it's inconceivable that the deaf community uses a single form of communication. My own deaf daughters, raised on Signing Exact English, learned ASL when they went to Aspen Camp for the Deaf. As adults, they interact with all kinds of people, some in spoken English, some in PSE, some in ASL. I conducted the only study I know on this topic. I investigated the degree to which Signing Exact English using children and residential school students could understand ASL stories. This study was published in the late 90s. In that study, 12 deaf children who were enrolled in a public school program that used C, and 14 deaf students who were enrolled in a residential school that used PSE and ASL watched ASL stories. They answered comprehension questions after they had finished watching each story. There was no difference in the ability of the C-using children with the residential children in answering these questions correctly. Another concern is that C is unnecessarily complex. C is no more complex than English, however. And there's no research to suggest that it should be simplified when talking to young deaf children. Children who are deaf or hard of hearing deserve the same language-rich environment that hearing mothers and fathers use with their young children. If adults do not sign grammatically correct English to children who are deaf or hard of hearing, how are they to have access to proficient language? Examples of age-appropriate English can be found in developmental curriculums for young children. An example is the Developmental Language Curriculum, or DLC. It was developed right here in Washington and lists pages and pages of skills beginning at 0 and going through age 8. For example, a child who is 24 to 30 months old should use more than a dozen verbs, use the present progressive verb form ing, name at least one color, use the pronouns it, this, that, and you, and the preposition in, and have a vocabulary of 300 to 500 words. Before 3 years of age, the child should use 2 and 3 word combinations, use what, where, and why question forms, use 24 verbs, begin to use the regular past tense, use about a dozen adjectives, about 4 pronouns, the contractions for negatives such as cannot and don't, use the prepositions on, under, and off, and the determiners a, the, this, and that, and use the possessive marker apostrophe s. This gives you some example of how comprehensive this curriculum is. If children who are deaf and hard of hearing are not exposed to these parts of English in an accessible manner, they'll have great difficulty acquiring them. English in, English out. Lastly, does it really work? Do children who are exposed to signing exact English actually acquire the language? In a research study headed up by Diane Nielsen, myself, Deb Stryker, and some of the teachers at our school, we studied the language and reading abilities of a cadre of children here. In this most recent study, there were 17 children from English-speaking homes old enough to be tested on standardized English language and reading tests. They had no additional learning disabilities, and they were granted permission by their parents to participate. Extensive information was gathered on these children: age of identification of hearing loss, what kind of equipment they wore, their aided and unaided hearing acuity across the speech range, their socioeconomic status, and whether their parents signed. This was published by the lead author, Megan McLean, in 2015. Students were administered both informal and formal or standardized tests of English language and reading ability. Authors found a developmental trend for both English language and reading. That is to say, every student improved every year of the study in those two areas. Morphological awareness, made possible via C, was found to be a prerequisite to higher language and reading scores. That is to say, the better these children's morphemic awareness, the better their English language understanding and use and their reading ability. Nielsen and her team reviewed the literature on reading acquisition, including the importance of morphemic awareness. They showed how the construction of C facilitates morphemic awareness. In that study, neither speech or CI use was significantly correlated to reading ability, but English language, both receptive and expressive, was. That is to say, the more proficient a student's English, the more age-appropriate their reading ability. Schick and Moeller conducted a study involving signing exact English using students and found that they clearly internalized the more complex structures of English, as demonstrated through embedded clauses, conjunctions, and modal use. Further, an increase in cognitive complexity resulted in more complex use of English structures. If you have concerns or questions about using C, contact me and I'll be happy to help you work through them. In conclusion, in this series, signing exact English has been defined and distinguished between other common, confusing methods of simultaneous communication. These include total communication, simultaneous communication, PSE, case or conceptually accurate signed English, MCE or manually coded English, signed English, both capital signed English and lowercase signed English, the more generic term, manual English, sign supported speech, sign supported English, just to name a few. These various methods are often discussed without definition and without information as to the extent to which English grammar is accurately signed. That is to say, sign-to-voice ratios for study participants are not provided typically to the reader. There's a lack of research to analyze these communication methods to clarify whether, and if so, how they differ one from the other. But there is now quite a body of research about signing exact English. Therefore, signing exact English is offered as a viable option when listening and spoken language, or ASL, are being discussed. When teams are developing an IFSP or an IEP, the method of communication needs to be clearly defined. the rationale, examples, and research that shows that signing exact English can be an effective primary method of communication when children are deaf or hard of hearing has been summarized in this series. Copies of much of what has been said is available on the Northwest School for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children website. The fact that an estimated 13% of children who are deaf or hard of hearing use simultaneous communication, and specifically C, is further evidence that it is an effective method of communication. Responses to common concerns about C have been provided, and professionals are encouraged to read the research on this communication method. Thank you for watching this series.